In the gleaming conference room of Nexus Dynamics headquarters, a brilliant data scientist was about to face the humiliation of her career. What started as a routine quarterly presentation took a shocking turn when she came face to face with Silicon Valley's most ruthless CEO. Dr. Elena Matthews wasn't your typical tech employee. For years, she had spent her life mastering artificial intelligence at MIT, known for her groundbreaking research in predictive analytics. When she encountered Marcus Sterling's public dismissal, "You're too pretty to be smart," in front of 200 stunned employees, she had no idea she was walking into a web of corporate fraud and murder. Elena's devastating response would expose stolen algorithms, a dead genius, and a company built on lies. What began as workplace harassment would become a fight for justice that would bring down an empire and honor the memory of Tommy Chen, whose brilliant work had been stolen and whose life had been taken to protect a secret worth millions. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Elena Matthews stood before the gleaming glass facade of Nexus Dynamics, her reflection wavering in the morning sunlight like a mirage. The building rose 30 stories into the San Francisco sky, its steel and glass architecture embodying the Silicon Valley dream she'd once believed in so fervently. Now, briefcase in hand and wearing her most professional blazer, navy blue, conservative, carefully chosen to project competence without attracting unwanted attention, she felt the familiar knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. Fresh start, she reminded herself, the mantra she'd repeated every morning for the past month. This time will be different. The trauma from Innovech still haunted her. The late-night messages from her former supervisor, the meeting room where HR had suggested she'd misunderstood his intentions. The whispered conversations that followed her down hallways until she'd finally resigned rather than endure another day of being treated like a pariah for speaking up. The settlement money had helped, but it couldn't erase the damage to her reputation or the way she'd started questioning her own perceptions, wondering if maybe she really had been oversensitive, as they'd suggested. "Dr. Matthews?" A bright voice interrupted her reverie. A young woman with auburn hair pulled back in a ponytail approached, her smile genuine and warm. "I'm Sarah Thompson, junior engineer. I'll be showing you around today." Elena felt some of her tension ease. Sarah's enthusiasm seemed authentic, untainted by the calculated networking that had characterized so many of her interactions in tech. "Please, call me Elena. And thank you. I'm excited to get started." As they walked through the lobby, Sarah chattered about the company with obvious pride. "Nexus has this amazing culture of innovation. Marcus, Mr. Sterling, our CEO, he really believes in empowering everyone to contribute their best ideas. It's not like those stuffy traditional corporations where everything has to go through 17 layers of approval." The lobby was impressive. Exposed brick walls decorated with abstract art, modern furniture and bright colors, and a coffee bar staffed by baristas who looked like they'd stepped out of a tech recruitment poster. Elena noticed the prominent diversity statement etched into the wall, promising equality, innovation, and mutual respect. The words should have been reassuring, but something about their polished presentation felt performative. "The engineering floor is amazing," Sarah continued as they stepped into the elevator. "We have standing desks, meditation rooms, even a game room with vintage arcade machines. Marcus says creativity can't be scheduled. It needs the right environment to flourish." Elena nodded, though she'd learned to be wary of companies that substituted perks for genuine respect. Still, Sarah's genuine excitement was infectious, and Elena found herself hoping that maybe, this time, the promise would match the reality. The engineering floor buzzed with activity. Developers huddled around whiteboards covered in complex diagrams, their conversations punctuated by the rapid clicking of mechanical keyboards. Sarah led her through the maze of desks to a corner workstation near a window overlooking the bay. "This is yours," Sarah announced proudly. "And I'm right over there if you need anything. We're going to be working together on some really exciting projects." As Elena settled into her new workspace, she caught fragments of conversations around her. Two male engineers near the coffee station were discussing a recent hire. "I don't know, man. She seems pretty good, but you know how it is. With diversity hires, sometimes they look better on paper than in practice." The casual dismissiveness in his tone made Elena's chest tighten, but she forced herself to focus on unpacking her laptop. "Everyone, gather around," Sarah called out suddenly. "Our CEO is here for one of his impromptu check-ins." Elena looked up to see Marcus Sterling striding onto the floor, and she immediately understood Sarah's admiration. He was tall and confident, with salt and pepper hair and the kind of easy charisma that commanded attention without effort. His smile seemed to light up the room as he approached the group of engineers who had quickly assembled. "Good morning, everyone!" His voice carried perfectly across the open space. "I just wanted to drop by and see how our brilliant team is pushing the boundaries of what's possible." His eyes scanned the group before landing on Elena. "And I see we have a new face. You must be Dr. Matthews. Welcome to the Nexus family." "Thank you, Mr. Sterling. I'm excited to contribute to the team." Elena kept her response professional, though she noticed how his gaze lingered on her face a beat longer than necessary. "Please call me Marcus. We're very informal here." His smile widened. "I've heard impressive things about your work in predictive analytics. I'm looking forward to seeing what fresh perspectives you bring to our AI initiatives." After Marcus left, the energy on the floor seemed to shift, becoming more focused and intense. Elena found herself in her first team meeting within the hour, sitting around a conference table with 6 other engineers as Sarah pulled up project documentation on the large monitor. "So Elena," said Tom Brennan, the team lead, "Sarah mentioned you have some ideas about predictive analytics. We're always looking for ways to improve our recommendation engine." Elena felt a familiar spark of excitement as she launched into her preliminary thoughts. "I've been developing a framework that uses multi-layered neural networks to identify patterns in user behavior that traditional algorithms miss. Instead of just tracking clicks and purchases, we can analyze micro-interactions, scroll, patterns, hover duration, even cursor movement, to predict user intent with unprecedented accuracy." The room fell silent, and Elena felt a moment of uncertainty. Had she shared too much too quickly? "That's actually brilliant," James Wilson, a senior engineer, said quietly. He was older than the others, with graying hair and tired eyes. That seemed to hold volumes of unspoken experience. "Have you run any preliminary tests?" "At my previous position, we saw a 47% improvement in conversion rates and a 62% reduction in user churn." Elena tried to keep the pride out of her voice, but the numbers spoke for themselves. "Jesus," muttered one of the junior developers. "That's insane." As the meeting continued, Elena noticed James observing her with an expression she couldn't quite read. When she suggested accessing the company's existing codebase to understand their current architecture, she saw something flicker across his face. Was it concern? "I'll get you set up with repository access," Sarah offered eagerly. "You can start reviewing our core systems this afternoon." Later that day, as Elena dove into Nexus's codebase, that flicker of concern from James began to make sense. Something was wrong. Not obviously wrong. The code functioned, the architecture was sound. But there were inconsistencies that nagged at her trained eye. Comments that referenced projects and timelines that didn't match the company's public history. Variable names. And coding styles that seemed to come from multiple sources. She found herself scrolling through commit histories, noting discrepancies in timestamps and author attributions. A particular module caught her attention, a sophisticated algorithm for pattern recognition that seemed far more advanced than anything else in the system. The commenting style was different, more academic, with references to research papers she recognized from her MIT days. "Hey, Elena, how's the code review going?" Sarah appeared at her desk, holding 2 cups of coffee. "It's interesting," Elena replied carefully. "This pattern recognition module is really impressive. Who developed it?" Sarah's expression shifted slightly, her enthusiasm dimming. "Oh, that's from our early days. Before my time, really. Marcus and the founding team built most of the core architecture." She paused, then added quietly, "We don't really talk much about the early days. Marcus likes to focus on moving forward, you know?" As Sarah walked away, Elena turned back to the code, that familiar investigative instinct stirring within her. The patterns she was seeing reminded her of something, a coding style she'd encountered during her graduate work, distinctive in its elegance and mathematical precision. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as she contemplated diving deeper. The smart thing would be to focus on her assigned projects, to keep her head down and build a reputation based on her own work. That's what she'd planned when she took this job, to be the model employee who never made waves. But as she stared at the lines of code that didn't quite fit the narrative she'd been told, Elena realized that some patterns were impossible to ignore. And in her experience, when something seemed too good to be true in Silicon Valley, it usually was. The afternoon sun streamed through her window, casting long shadows across her desk. Around her, the office continued its rhythm of productivity and ambition, everyone focused on building the future. But Elena couldn't shake the feeling that the foundation they were building on might not be as solid as it appeared. She saved her work and closed her laptop, telling herself she was probably overthinking things. After all, every company had legacy code and inherited systems. The inconsistencies she'd noticed could have perfectly innocent explanations. But as she gathered her things to leave for the day, Elena made a mental note to dig a little deeper tomorrow. Call it professional curiosity, or maybe just the persistent voice in her head that had learned not to trust easy answers. Either way, she had a feeling that her fresh start at Nexus Dynamics was about to become far more complicated than she'd hoped. Elena's fingers traced the edge of her coffee cup as she stared at her monitor the next morning, the code anomalies from yesterday still haunting her thoughts. The persistent voice in her head that had learned not to trust easy answers grew louder with each line she reviewed. She'd arrived early, hoping to dig deeper into the pattern recognition module without drawing attention. The office was quieter, at 7 a.m., populated only by a few dedicated engineers and the ever-present hum of servers. Elena pulled up the commit history again, this time focusing on the timestamps and author information. The more she investigated, the more convinced she became that something fundamental was wrong with Nexus's origin story. "You're here early." The voice made her jump. James Wilson stood behind her with his own coffee, his tired eyes scanning her screen before she could minimize the window. "Just trying to understand the architecture," Elena said carefully, watching his expression. "This pattern recognition module is sophisticated. The mathematical approach is familiar." James was quiet for a long moment, his gaze shifting around the empty office before settling back on her. "Word of advice, Elena. Sometimes it's better not to ask too many questions about the early days. Marcus values forward momentum over historical accuracy." Before Elena could respond, James walked away, but not before she caught the warning in his tone. "Keep your head down." The message was clear, but it only intensified her curiosity. An hour later, the office began filling with the morning rush. Sarah bounced over with her characteristic enthusiasm, chattering about a new feature rollout, but Elena found herself only half listening. Her attention was drawn to Marcus Sterling's voice echoing from his glass-walled office, where he was having what appeared to be an intense conversation with a nervous-looking junior developer. "I don't care what the timeline says," Marcus's voice carried despite the supposedly soundproof walls. "When I give you a deadline, I expect results. If you can't handle the pressure, maybe you should consider whether this company is the right fit for you. Elena watched the young man's shoulders slump as he nodded rapidly, his face flushed with embarrassment. The transformation from Marcus's public persona, the inspiring leader who valued creativity and innovation, to this intimidating authority figure was jarring. "He's under a lot of pressure lately," Sarah said quietly, following Elena's gaze. "The board has been pushing for faster growth, and you know how it is with investors. They don't understand that good code takes time." Elena turned to study Sarah's face. Even now, defending Marcus, there was something uncertain in her expression. Has he always been like that in private meetings? Sarah hesitated, her loyalty warring with honesty. "He's passionate about the company. Sometimes that comes across as intense, but he really does care about making Nexus successful. He's just—" She paused, then shrugged. "I guess all visionaries have their difficult moments." That afternoon, Elena found herself digging deeper into the mysterious code. She cross-referenced the sophisticated algorithms with academic papers in the MIT Digital Library, following a hunch that had been growing since yesterday. The pattern recognition techniques used in the module were cutting-edge, incorporating research that had only been published in the past few years. As she scrolled through research papers, one name kept appearing as a co-author on the most relevant studies: Tommy Chen. The coding style in Nexus's core module matched the elegant, mathematically precise approach described in Chen's academic work. Elena's hands trembled slightly as she typed Tommy Chen MIT into the search bar. The results made her stomach clench. Tommy Chen, brilliant MIT computer science PhD candidate, found dead in his apartment 2 years ago. Ruled a suicide. He had been working on revolutionary AI algorithms that could transform predictive analytics, the same algorithms that powered Nexus Dynamics' core technology. "Find anything interesting?" The voice behind her made Elena spin around. James Wilson stood there again, but this time his expression was grave rather than merely cautious. Elena struggled to find words. "James, do you know anything about Tommy Chen?" James's face went pale. He glanced around the office, then pulled up a chair beside her desk. "We need to talk, but not here. Meet me at the Starbucks on 3rd Street after work. And Elena?" His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "Delete your search history. Now." The rest of the day passed in a blur of anxiety and forced normalcy. Elena tried to focus on her assigned projects, but her mind kept returning to Tommy Chen and the implications of what she'd discovered. Every time Marcus passed by her workstation, she felt a chill of unease. During the late afternoon team meeting, Elena listened with new ears as Marcus discussed the company's innovative breakthroughs and proprietary algorithms. The words felt hollow now, tainted by the possibility that they were built on a foundation of theft and tragedy. "Elena, you've been quiet today," Marcus observed, his penetrating gaze fixed on her. "I hope you're not having second thoughts about joining our team?" "Not at all," Elena replied, forcing a smile. "I'm just absorbing everything. There's so much impressive work happening here." "Good." Marcus's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I'd hate to think we'd hired someone who wasn't fully committed to our vision." At 6 p.m., Elena found James waiting in the corner booth of the Starbucks, his hands wrapped around a coffee cup like it was an anchor. She slid across from him, her heart racing. "Before you say anything," James began, his voice low, "you need to understand that what I'm about to tell you could destroy both our careers, maybe worse." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Elena nodded, her mouth dry. Tommy Chen was Marcus's roommate at MIT. Brilliant kid, but troubled. When Marcus dropped out junior year, Tommy was working on algorithms that would revolutionize AI prediction. Marcus stayed in touch, visited him regularly. James paused, his eyes haunted. Tommy died 3 months before Marcus launched Nexus Dynamics, the core technology that made this company possible. It was all Tommy's work. "How do you know this?" Elena whispered. "Because I helped build the first implementation. Marcus hired me right after the company launched, told me the algorithms were his graduate work. But I recognized the coding, style, the mathematical approach. I'd seen Tommy present his research at conferences." James's hands shook slightly. "By the time I realized what Marcus had done, I was in too deep. I had a family to support, elderly parents who needed my income, so I kept quiet and hated myself for it." Elena felt sick. "James, we have to be very careful," James interrupted. "Marcus has built an empire on a lie, and he'll do whatever it takes to protect it. You've already caught his attention by asking questions. If he thinks you're a threat." James trailed off, but the implication hung in the air. Elena thought about Marcus's cold smile that afternoon, the way his gaze had lingered on her just a beat too long. The quarterly all-hands meeting was next week, where she was scheduled to present her AI proposal to the entire company. As she walked back to her car, Elena's mind raced with the implications of what she'd learned. Tommy Chen's brilliant work, stolen and monetized by the man who should have been his friend. A young genius driven to suicide while his innovations enriched the person who betrayed him. She thought about her own experience at Innovesh, how speaking up had cost her everything. But this was different. This wasn't just about workplace harassment. This was about a dead man's legacy and a company built on theft and lies. Elena started her car and sat in the parking garage for a long moment, staring at the Nexus Dynamics building rising into the evening sky. Tomorrow, she would have to walk back into that office, smile at Marcus Sterling, and pretend she didn't know the truth about the company's foundation. But she also knew that some secrets were too big to keep buried forever. Tommy Chen deserved justice, even if pursuing it meant risking everything she'd worked to rebuild. The question was whether she had the courage to be the one to speak his name in a room full of people who preferred not to hear it. The question was whether she had the courage to be the one to speak his name in a room full of people who preferred not to hear it. As Elena walked into the packed auditorium for the quarterly all-hands meeting 1 week later, she felt the weight of Tommy Chen's stolen legacy pressing against her chest like a physical force. 200 employees filled the modern amphitheater, their faces illuminated by the glow of laptops and phones. The energy was electric with anticipation. Quarterly meetings were Marcus Sterling's stage, where he painted visions of the future that made everyone believe they were part of something revolutionary. Elena took her seat in the third row, her presentation materials clutched in sweaty palms. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus's voice boomed across the auditorium as he strode onto the stage, commanding immediate attention. "Welcome to another chapter in the Nexus Dynamics story, a story we're writing together, one innovation at a time." The crowd erupted in applause. Elena watched Sarah clapping enthusiastically beside her, still believing in the myth of Marcus as visionary leader. Even James, sitting several rows back, participated in the ritual, though Elena caught the hollow look in his eyes. Marcus launched into his quarterly update with practiced charisma, highlighting revenue growth, new partnerships, and the company's expanding influence in the AI space. Each success story felt like another nail in Tommy Chen's coffin, achievements built on stolen brilliance that would never be acknowledged. "Now," Marcus continued, his smile widening as he scanned the audience, "I want to showcase the incredible talent we continue to attract. Dr. Elena Matthews, our new senior data scientist, has developed some fascinating ideas about predictive analytics. Elena, would you join me on stage?" Elena's legs felt unsteady as she made her way to the front, the weight of 200 pairs of eyes following her movement. The presentation screen lit up with her carefully prepared slides. Months of work distilled into clean graphics and compelling data points. "Thank you, Marcus." Elena's voice carried clearly through the microphone, surprising her with its steadiness. "I'm excited to share a framework that could revolutionize how we understand user behavior." She launched into her presentation with growing confidence, explaining the multi-layered neural networks, the micro-interaction analysis, the unprecedented accuracy rates. The audience was engaged, leaning forward as she demonstrated the potential applications. For a moment, Elena felt the pure joy of sharing breakthrough research, the same feeling that must have driven Tommy Chen in his final months. The preliminary results show a 47% improvement in conversion rates, Elena concluded, with 62% reduction in user churn. This isn't just an incremental advance. It's a fundamental shift in how we can predict and respond to human behavior. The applause was immediate and enthusiastic. Elena felt a surge of professional pride, the validation she'd been seeking since her traumatic departure from Innovec. But as she turned to hand the microphone back to Marcus, she saw something cold flicker across his features. "Well," Marcus said, his smile now sharp-edged, "that certainly sounds impressive." He paused, letting silence stretch across the auditorium. "Though I have to wonder, and forgive me for being direct, Elena, but with your obvious attributes, are we sure these aren't just pretty slides covering up fundamental flaws in methodology?" The comment hit the room like a physical blow. Elena felt the collective intake of breath, saw Sarah's face go white with shock, watched as James sat up straighter in his seat. But Marcus wasn't finished. "I mean, let's be honest," he continued, his voice carrying that casual, dismissive tone that made the insult even more devastating. "You're too pretty to be smart enough to develop something this sophisticated. Isn't it more likely you've misunderstood existing research and packaged it as innovation?" The auditorium fell into stunned silence. Elena felt the familiar wave of humiliation washing over her, the same feeling she'd experienced at Innovec, when her harasser had suggested her PhD was probably earned through alternative methods. This was supposed to be different. This was supposed to be her fresh start. But as Elena stood there, microphone in hand, something crystallized inside her. The faces in the audience, some shocked, some uncomfortable, a few nodding in agreement, with Marcus, represented everything wrong with the tech industry's treatment of women. And Marcus Sterling, standing there with his smug smile, embodied the worst of Silicon Valley's toxic masculinity. "Actually, Marcus," Elena said, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade, "I think there might be some confusion about who understands sophisticated research." Marcus's smile faltered slightly. "Excuse me?" Elena turned to face the audience directly, her fear transforming into crystal-clear purpose. "I have a PhD in computer science from MIT, where I specialized in machine learning and predictive analytics. My dissertation committee included 3 of the leading researchers in the field." She paused, letting that sink in. "But you're right about one thing. The methodology I presented is sophisticated. Perhaps too sophisticated for someone who dropped out of college in his junior year to fully comprehend." A murmur rippled through the audience. Marcus's face had gone pale, but Elena wasn't finished. "In fact, since we're discussing research methodology, I'm curious about something." Elena's voice remained calm, professional, but deadly. "The core algorithms that power Nexus Dynamics employ some very advanced techniques. The mathematical approach is quite elegant, almost academic in its precision. Who developed that foundational code?" Marcus's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Elena could see sweat beading on his forehead as he realized where this was heading. Because the coding style is remarkably similar to the work of Thomas Chen, the MIT PhD candidate whose research papers revolutionized predictive AI before his death 2 years ago. Elena's voice carried clearly to every corner of the auditorium. I assume you were familiar with his work, given that you were roommates? The silence in the room was deafening. Elena watched as Marcus's carefully constructed facade crumbled in real time, his charismatic confidence replaced by the desperate look of a man whose lies were finally catching up with him. I think, Elena continued, her voice filled with quiet authority, that anyone who truly understands sophisticated research would know the difference between innovation and appropriation, between leadership and theft, between vision and fraud. She set the microphone down on the podium and walked off the stage, her heart pounding but her steps steady. Behind her, she could hear the explosion of whispers and shocked conversations as 200 employees tried to process what they'd just witnessed. As Elena reached her seat, she caught Sarah's expression, a mixture of awe and horror as her hero worship of Marcus finally shattered. Across the room, James Wilson was staring at her with something that looked like respect and terror in equal measure. Marcus remained frozen on stage, his empire of lies suddenly exposed to the harsh light of truth. The quarterly all-hands meeting had become something none of them had expected, a reckoning that would reshape everything about Nexus Dynamics. Elena gathered her things, knowing that she had just declared war on one of Silicon Valley's most ruthless CEOs. But as she walked toward the exit, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years: the satisfaction of speaking truth to power, regardless of the consequences. The battle for Tommy Chen's legacy had finally begun. The battle for Tommy Chen's legacy had finally begun. Elena's footsteps echoed in the empty hallway as she left the auditorium, the explosive murmur of 200 shocked voices fading behind her. Her hands shook slightly as she pressed the elevator button, adrenaline coursing through her system. She had just committed career suicide in the most public way possible, but for the first time in months, she felt truly alive. The elevator doors opened to reveal Victoria Hamilton, Nexus's head of HR, her perfectly composed expression betraying nothing. Dr. Matthews, Victoria said smoothly, stepping aside to let Elena enter. That was quite a presentation. Elena studied Victoria's face as the elevator rose to the executive floor. There was something calculating in the older woman's eyes, an assessment being made in real time. I believe in speaking truth, Elena replied carefully. Truth can be subjective in corporate environments, Victoria said, her tone neutral but pointed. I'd like to schedule a meeting with you first thing Monday morning. We should discuss your integration into the company culture. The words sounded professional, but Elena recognized the threat beneath the surface. As the elevator reached her floor, Victoria's hand briefly touched Elena's arm, a gesture that could have been supportive but felt more like a warning. By Monday morning, Elena discovered just how quickly Marcus Sterling could mobilize his forces. She arrived at her desk to find her computer access restricted, her project assignments mysteriously redistributed, and a formal email requesting her presence at an urgent performance review with Victoria Hamilton. Elena, Sarah hurried over, her face flushed with anxiety. I've been trying to reach you all weekend. Things have been intense around here. Elena looked around the office, noting the conspicuous silence that greeted her arrival. Colleagues who had been friendly just days earlier now avoided eye contact, their conversations stopping abruptly when she passed. The message was clear. Associating with Elena Matthews was now a career risk. What happened after I left? Elena asked quietly. Sarah glanced around nervously. Marcus. He recovered quickly, gave this speech about disgruntled employees and corporate sabotage, said you were probably planted by a competitor to steal trade secrets. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Some people are buying it. The performance review with Victoria was a masterclass in corporate intimidation disguised as concern. Victoria's office was pristine and intimidating, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the San Francisco Bay and carefully curated art that projected success and authority. "Please, sit," Victoria said, gesturing to a chair positioned to face the window's glare. "I want to discuss some concerning reports about your recent behavior." Elena sat straighter, recognizing the setup. "What reports?" Victoria consulted a thick folder, her expression grave. "Multiple colleagues have expressed concerns about your aggressive questioning of company practices, your unauthorized access to proprietary code, and what several witnesses describe as erratic behavior during team meetings." "That's not accurate," Elena said firmly. "I was doing my job, reviewing code to understand our architecture." "Dr. Matthews," Victoria's voice took on a patronizing tone, "I understand you've had difficulties at previous positions. Sometimes trauma can manifest as paranoid behavior, seeing conspiracies where none exist. We want to help you succeed here, but that requires acknowledging when personal issues are affecting professional judgment." The psychological manipulation was expertly crafted. Victoria was reframing Elena's legitimate concerns as symptoms of mental instability, creating a narrative that would justify any future disciplinary action. Elena felt the familiar knot of self-doubt forming in her stomach, the same feeling she'd struggled with after Innovech. "I'd like you to take some time to reflect on your goals here at Nexus," Victoria continued. "Perhaps consider whether this environment is the right fit for someone with your particular sensitivities." As Elena left Victoria's office, she found James Wilson waiting by the elevators, his face grim. "We need to talk," he said quietly, "but not here." They met an hour later at a small diner several blocks from the office, James's paranoia evident in the way he chose a corner booth with clear sightlines to all entrances. "They're coming after you hard," James said without preamble. "Marcus called an emergency meeting with his inner circle yesterday. I have a friend in facilities. They're planning to plant evidence on your computer. Make it look like you've been stealing proprietary information." Elena's blood ran cold. Can they do that? Marcus has done worse to protect his secrets. There was another engineer 3 years ago, started asking similar questions about the code origins. Suddenly, there were performance issues, then allegations of selling information to competitors. The guy was blacklisted from every major tech company in the Valley. James reached into his jacket and pulled out a small USB drive. "I've been documenting everything for years. Code comparisons, email chains, financial records showing payments to Tommy's estate that were later reversed. It's all here." Elena stared at the drive. "James, if they find out you gave me this—" "I'm tired of being complicit," James interrupted, his voice heavy with years of suppressed guilt. Tommy Chen deserved better than to have his life's work stolen by that sociopath. Maybe it's time I stopped being such a coward. That afternoon, Elena's situation deteriorated further. Her keycard access was temporarily suspended due to security concerns. Her work emails were being monitored, and she received an anonymous note warning her to stop asking questions before something bad happens. But she also discovered unexpected support. Sarah appeared at her desk during lunch, looking nervous but determined. "I don't care what Marcus says," Sarah announced loudly enough for nearby colleagues to hear. "What happened in that meeting was wrong, and anyone with integrity should be disgusted by it." Several engineers looked up from their work, and Elena saw something shift in the office dynamics. Sarah's public support was giving others permission to question the official narrative. That evening, Elena sat in her apartment staring at James's USB drive and a business card she'd found in her MIT alumni directory. Detective Ray Morrison, Financial Crimes Division, San Francisco Police Department. According to his LinkedIn profile, he'd once worked in tech before becoming a cop, specializing in corporate fraud and white-collar crime. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Stop digging or face the consequences. This is your only warning." Elena set the phone down, her hands steady despite the threat. Marcus Sterling thought he could intimidate her into silence, use the same tactics that had worked on countless other victims. But he'd made a crucial miscalculation. Elena Matthews had already lost everything once for speaking truth to power. This time she had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. Tommy Chen's stolen legacy deserved justice, and she was going to make sure he got it. She picked up Detective Morrison's card and began dialing his number. The real war was just beginning. She picked up Detective Morrison's card and began dialing his number. The real war was just beginning. Detective Ray Morrison answered on the third ring, his voice gravelly with exhaustion. "Morrison here." "Detective Morrison, my name is Elena Matthews. I'm calling about potential corporate fraud at Nexus Dynamics." Elena's voice was steady, despite her racing heart. There was a pause. "I'm familiar with the company. What kind of fraud are we talking about?" "Intellectual property theft, possibly connected to a suspicious death 2 years ago. I have documentation." Another pause, longer this time. "Let's meet. There's a coffee shop on Market Street called Grind Coffee. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. Come alone and bring everything you have." Elena hung up and stared at James's USB drive. Whatever was on there could either vindicate her or destroy what remained of her career. She inserted the drive into her personal laptop, her hands trembling slightly as the files loaded. What she found exceeded her worst fears. The folder contained hundreds of documents meticulously organized by James over several years. Email chains between Marcus and investors discussing acquired intellectual property from defunct research projects. Financial records showing payments to Tommy Chen's estate that were mysteriously reversed weeks later. Most damning of all, a series of code comparison files that proved beyond doubt that Nexus's core algorithms were lifted wholesale from Tommy's MIT research. But it was the final folder that made Elena's blood run cold. Other incidents. James had documented a pattern of harassment, intimidation, and retaliation against employees who asked inconvenient questions. 3 female engineers had been forced out after reporting sexual harassment. 2 male engineers had been blacklisted after questioning technical decisions. And there was Tommy Chen himself, emails showing Marcus's increasing pressure on his former roommate in the months before his death. Elena spent the night reading through Tommy's final communications with Marcus. The picture that emerged was heartbreaking. A brilliant young man struggling with depression and financial pressure, desperate to complete his research but unable to secure funding. Marcus had positioned himself as a supportive friend while systematically stealing Tommy's work and isolating him from potential collaborators. The next morning, Elena arrived at Grind Coffee 15 minutes early, choosing a table with a clear view of the entrance. Detective Morrison was easy to spot when he arrived. Tall, weathered, with the careful observational habits of someone who'd seen too much of humanity's darker side. "Dr. Matthews?" He slid into the seat across from her, his eyes already scanning the USB drive she'd placed on the table. "Tell me what you've got." Elena walked him through everything. Her discovery of the code anomalies, her confrontation with Marcus, James's evidence cache. Morrison listened without interruption, occasionally taking notes in a small notebook. "This is significant," Morrison said when she finished. "But we need more than code comparisons to build a criminal case. We need direct evidence of intent to defraud, paper trails showing Marcus knew he was stealing intellectual property. What about Tommy Chen's death? The timing seems suspicious." Morrison's expression darkened. "I remember that case. Ruled suicide. But there were elements that bothered the investigating officers. A brilliant kid with everything to live for, found dead just as his research was gaining recognition." He paused. "Have you spoken to his family?" Elena shook her head. "I didn't want to intrude on their grief." His sister, Lin Chen, lives in Oakland. She's been trying to get someone to take another look at her brother's death for 2 years. Might be worth a conversation. That afternoon, Elena called in sick to work, her first time in years, and drove to Oakland. Lin Chen lived in a modest apartment near the BART station, and when she opened the door, Elena saw an immediate family resemblance. Lin had her brother's intelligent eyes and delicate features, but they were marked by years of grief and frustration. "You're the first person from the tech world who's cared about what happened to Tommy," Lin said, leading Elena into a living room dominated by photographs and awards celebrating her brother's achievements. "Everyone else just wanted to forget him." Lin's story filled in the devastating details James's documents had only hinted at. Tommy had been excited about his research, but increasingly isolated as Marcus's influence grew. Marcus convinced Tommy that traditional academic publishing would hurt his chances of commercializing the research, Lin explained. "He persuaded my brother to keep his work secret, said they would start a company together once Tommy graduated." "What changed?" Elena asked. Tommy started having doubts about Marcus's intentions. He caught Marcus showing his research to potential investors without permission. When Tommy confronted him, Marcus threatened to claim the algorithms were jointly developed. Lin's voice broke slightly. Tommy was so naive. He trusted Marcus, because they'd been friends since freshman year. Lin showed Elena a box of Tommy's personal effects that the police had returned. Among them was a journal documenting his growing suspicions about Marcus's betrayal. The final entries were particularly chilling. "M says he'll ruin my reputation in the field if I don't sign over commercial rights. Don't know what to do. Can't afford a lawyer. Maybe he's right that no one will believe me over him. The last few weeks before Tommy died, he barely left his apartment," Lin continued. "He kept saying Marcus had stolen everything and there was no point in living. I tried to get him help, but—" She trailed off, wiping away tears. Elena felt a surge of rage at Marcus Sterling that was almost physical in its intensity. Not only had he stolen Tommy's work, but his psychological manipulation had contributed to a young man's death. "I have evidence," Elena said quietly. "Documentation. That proves Marcus stole your brother's research. I'm working with a detective to build a case." For the first time since Elena arrived, Lin Chen smiled. "Tommy would have liked you. He always said the tech world needed more people who cared about doing the right thing." As Elena drove back to San Francisco, her phone buzzed with a message from Sarah. "Victoria Hamilton came by looking for you. Said there were urgent security concerns about your building access. Be careful." Elena realized that while she'd been gathering evidence against Marcus, he'd been escalating his campaign against her. But she also knew she was no longer fighting this battle alone. Detective Morrison was investigating, Lin Chen was ready to testify about her brother's final months, and James Wilson had provided documentation that could bring down Nexus's entire leadership. The question was whether they could build their case before Marcus succeeded in destroying Elena's credibility completely. As she pulled into her apartment parking garage, Elena noticed a black sedan that seemed to be following her route. Marcus Sterling was playing for keeps, and Elena realized she might be in more danger than she'd initially understood. But Tommy Chen's memory deserved justice, and Elena was determined to see this through to the end, no matter what Marcus Sterling threw at her. But Tommy Chen's memory deserved justice, and Elena was determined to see this through to the end, no matter what Marcus Sterling threw at her. The black sedan had disappeared by the time she reached her apartment, but Elena couldn't shake the feeling of being watched as she climbed the stairs to her third-floor unit. Her phone rang as she unlocked her door. Detective Morrison. "We have a problem," he said without preamble. "I ran background checks on the Nexus leadership. Marcus Sterling has connections to some very powerful people, city council members, federal judges, investors with ties to defense contracts. This isn't just corporate fraud anymore. If the algorithms Tommy Chen developed have military applications, we could be looking at national security implications. Elena sank into her kitchen chair, the weight of what she'd uncovered finally hitting her. What does that mean for the case? It means we need to be extremely careful about how we proceed, and it means you're in more danger than I initially thought. Morrison's voice was grim. I'm recommending you document everything, put copies in multiple secure locations, and consider going public sooner rather than later. That night, Elena lay awake staring at the ceiling, her mind racing through impossible calculations. How many innocent employees would lose their jobs if Nexus collapsed? Sarah, with her student loans and dreams of changing the world? James, supporting his elderly parents? Hundreds of engineers who had no idea their company was built on stolen work and lies. But then she thought about Tommy Chen, dying alone in his apartment while Marcus Sterling prepared to profit from his life's work. About the female engineers who'd been silenced and driven from the industry. About every brilliant woman who'd been told she was too pretty to be smart by men who built empires on other people's intelligence. The next morning brought fresh horrors. Elena arrived at work to find security guards at her desk, boxing up her personal belongings under Victoria Hamilton's supervision. Dr. Matthews, Victoria said with false sympathy, I'm afraid we've discovered some irregularities in your computer access logs. You'll need to surrender your company laptop and keycard immediately. Elena recognized the setup. What kind of irregularities? Unauthorized access to classified files, attempts to download proprietary code to external devices. Victoria's voice carried the practiced authority of someone who'd destroyed careers before. We're conducting a full investigation, but until then, you're suspended without pay. The security guards found a USB drive in Elena's desk drawer, one she'd never seen before. Elena watched in horror as Victoria examined it with theatrical concern. This appears to contain sensitive company information, Victoria announced loudly enough for nearby employees to hear. I'm afraid this constitutes grounds for immediate termination and potential criminal charges. That's not mine, Elena said, but she could see the doubt in her colleagues' faces. Marcus had played this perfectly, creating evidence while positioning himself as the victim of corporate espionage. Sarah appeared at Elena's side, her face flushed with anger. This is ridiculous. Elena would never steal anything. Miss Thompson, Victoria's voice carried a warning. I'd be very careful about defending someone under investigation for corporate theft. Such associations can have serious career implications. Elena saw fear flicker across Sarah's face, the same fear that had kept James Wilson silent for years, the fear of losing everything for standing up to power. It's okay, Sarah, Elena said quietly. Don't jeopardize your career for me. But Sarah's jaw set with determination. No, this is wrong, and everyone knows it. She turned to address the gathered crowd of coworkers. We all saw what Marcus did in that meeting. This is retaliation, pure and simple. Elena felt a surge of pride and terror for the young woman who was risking everything to defend her. But she also knew Marcus wouldn't let this challenge go unanswered. That afternoon, Elena met with Dr. Patricia Vance, her former thesis advisor, at MIT, in a quiet cafe near campus. Dr. Vance had been following Elena's career with concern, especially after the Innovec incident. You're talking about destroying an entire company based on accusations against a dead man, Dr. Vance said after Elena explained the situation. Even if you're right about the intellectual property theft, think about the collateral damage. Hundreds of jobs, investor losses, the impact on innovation in the field. But what about Tommy Chen? Elena asked. What about justice for him? Dr. Vance's expression softened. Elena, I knew Tommy Chen. He was brilliant, but he was also troubled. The last time I spoke with him, he was struggling with severe depression and paranoid ideation. It's possible he imagined conspiracies that didn't exist. The words hit Elena like a physical blow. Her mentor, the woman who'd guided her through graduate school, was questioning the very foundation of her case. Elena felt the familiar spiral of self-doubt beginning, the same feeling that had plagued her after Inovesh. "Dr. Vance, I've seen the evidence." "You've seen what appears to be evidence," Dr. Vance corrected gently. "But corporate fraud. Cases are incredibly complex. Code can be independently developed, research can be coincidentally similar. Are you certain you're not letting your own traumatic experiences color your interpretation of events?" Elena left the meeting shaken. Even people who cared about her were questioning her judgment. Maybe she was seeing conspiracies where none existed. Maybe Marcus Sterling was just an arrogant CEO, not a criminal mastermind. But that evening, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Meet me at the parking garage on Bryant Street, level 3. Come alone. A friend." Elena's instincts screamed danger, but something about the message felt different from Marcus's earlier threats. She drove to the garage, her heart pounding as she climbed to the 3rd level. A figure emerged from behind a concrete pillar. David Sterling, Marcus's younger brother and Nexus's COO. His face was haggard, his usually perfect appearance disheveled. "Dr. Matthews, thank you for coming," he said, his voice shaking. "I need to tell you something about my brother, but I need assurance that you can protect me if I do." Elena studied his face, seeing genuine fear in his eyes. "What do you know?" "David?" "I know Marcus killed Tommy Chen." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Elena felt the world shift around her as David Sterling, the weak-willed brother who'd always lived in Marcus's shadow, prepared to shatter everything. She thought she knew about the case. "It wasn't suicide," David continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "Marcus went to Tommy's apartment that night. When he came back, he was different, agitated, paranoid. He told me Tommy had threatened to expose everything, that he'd had no choice." Elena's hands shook as she reached for her phone to record the conversation. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture they formed was more terrifying than she'd ever imagined. The whistleblower's dilemma had just become a murder case. The whistleblower's dilemma had just become a murder case. Elena's phone trembled in her hands as she hit record. David Sterling's confession echoing through the concrete garage like a death knell for everything she thought she knew about corporate corruption. "David, I need you to repeat that clearly," Elena said, her voice steadier than she felt. "For the record." David's face was pale, sweat beading despite the cool evening air. "Marcus told me he went to Tommy's apartment to convince him to sign a licensing agreement. When Tommy refused and threatened to go public with accusations of theft, Marcus said things got physical. Tommy fell and hit his head, but Marcus—" David's voice broke. "Marcus said he made sure Tommy wouldn't wake up to cause trouble." Elena felt sick. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I can't live with it anymore. And because Marcus is planning something worse." David glanced around the garage nervously. "He's hired a firm to destroy your reputation completely. They're going to plant evidence that you're selling secrets to foreign competitors, create a media narrative that paints you as an unstable woman with a vendetta." Before Elena could respond, her phone rang. Amanda Foster, the investigative journalist she'd researched but never contacted. "Dr. Matthews, I understand you have information about irregularities at Nexus Dynamics. I'd like to meet." Elena exchanged a glance with David. "How did you get my number?" "I have sources who believe there's a significant story here. Can we talk?" 2 hours later, Elena sat across from Amanda Foster in a 24-hour diner in Oakland, David Sterling having fled after providing his contact information and promising to testify when the time came. Amanda was younger than Elena had expected, with sharp eyes and the intense focus of someone who'd built a career on exposing uncomfortable truths. "Before we begin," Amanda said, placing a digital recorder on the table. "You should know that Marcus Sterling's people contacted me 3 hours ago. They're claiming you're a corporate spy with a history of making false accusations against employers." Elena's heart sank. Marcus was already controlling the narrative. "They provided documentation of your termination from Innovec," Amanda continued, "along with psychiatric evaluations suggesting you have persistent delusions about workplace harassment." Elena recognized the tactic, using her previous trauma as a weapon to discredit her current allegations. "Those evaluations were conducted by company-hired psychiatrists after I reported sexual harassment. They were part of the company's legal strategy to avoid liability." Amanda nodded. "I figured as much. Corporate character assassination is unfortunately common in these cases." She leaned forward. "But I need more than your word to go up against someone with Marcus Sterling's resources. What evidence do you have?" Elena laid out everything: James's USB drive with its damning documentation, Lin Chen's testimony about her brother's final months, David Sterling's confession about the murder. As she spoke, she watched Amanda's expression shift from skepticism to intense interest. "This is bigger than corporate fraud," Amanda said finally. "If you're right about Tommy Chen's death, we're talking about murder to cover up intellectual property theft. But we need to be extremely careful about how we break this story." Over the next 48 hours, Elena watched her world fracture in real time. Marcus Sterling's media offensive was surgical in its precision. Stories began appearing in tech blogs questioning Elena's credibility, highlighting her termination from Nexus for security violations, and suggesting she was seeking revenge against successful companies. The narrative was expertly crafted. A troubled woman with a history of making false accusations, now targeting an innovative company out of spite. Anonymous sources, likely Marcus's allies, provided quotes about Elena's erratic behavior and concerning obsession with conspiracy theories. Sarah called Elena in tears. "They fired me this morning, said I was part of your conspiracy to steal trade secrets. I can't find another job. Every company I've applied to has already heard rumors about me." Elena felt the crushing weight of responsibility. By fighting Marcus Sterling, she'd destroyed the career of the one person who'd stood by her. But the war escalated when Amanda Foster's preliminary article was published online. Titled, "The Tommy Chen Files, Questions about Nexus Dynamics Origins," it carefully laid out the evidence without making direct accusations, allowing readers to draw their own conclusions. The response was immediate and vicious. Marcus Sterling appeared on tech podcasts, portraying himself as the victim of a coordinated attack by disgruntled former employees and unethical journalists seeking sensational stories. He was calm, persuasive, and utterly convincing in his denials. Dr. Matthews was terminated for cause after attempting to steal proprietary information, Marcus said during a particularly damaging interview. When that failed, she began spreading malicious rumors to damage the company that gave her an opportunity despite her troubled employment history. Elena watched in horror as the narrative shifted against her. Social media buzzed with criticism of false accusers and vengeful feminists destroying successful men's careers. She received hundreds of threatening messages. Her address was posted online, and someone vandalized her car with the words, "Lying bitch." James Wilson disappeared entirely, refusing to answer calls or emails. Elena realized Marcus had likely threatened his family or offered him financial incentives to stay silent. Without James's testimony, her evidence was circumstantial at best. Victoria Hamilton gave a carefully orchestrated interview portraying Nexus as a victim of corporate espionage. "We're seeing a troubling trend of individuals using false accusations of misconduct to cover their own criminal behavior," she said, her professional demeanor lending credibility to Marcus's narrative. But cracks began to appear in Marcus's defense when anonymous sources started leaking information supporting Elena's claims. Someone, possibly sympathetic Nexus employees, provided additional documentation to Amanda Foster, including internal emails showing Marcus's pattern of silencing, critics and financial records that raised questions about the company's early funding. The tech community began choosing sides. Some rallied around Marcus, viewing the accusations as an attack on successful entrepreneurship. Others, particularly women who'd experienced similar treatment, began sharing their own stories of harassment and retaliation in Silicon Valley. Elena found herself at the center of a cultural war she'd never intended to start. Her fight for Tommy Chen's justice had become a symbol of broader tensions about power, gender, and accountability in the tech industry. Detective Morrison called with an update that sent chills down Elena's spine. Someone broke into Tommy Chen's sister's apartment last night. Nothing was stolen, but her brother's personal effects were scattered around. It was a message. Marcus. Sterling was no longer content with character assassination. He was threatening anyone who might support Elena's case. And Elena realized she was running out of time before he escalated to even more dangerous tactics. The media war was reaching its climax, and Elena wasn't sure she could survive what came next. The media war was reaching its climax, and Elena wasn't sure she could survive what came next. But survival became secondary when her phone buzzed, at 6 a.m. with an urgent message from Amanda Foster. Emergency board meeting at Nexus today. Anonymous source says investors are panicking. This is it. Elena dressed carefully, knowing this might be her final chance to present the truth before Marcus's machine destroyed her completely. Detective Morrison had arranged for her to wear a wire, and she felt the small recording device like a lifeline against her chest as she drove to the Nexus building. The lobby buzzed with unusual activity. Serious-looking men in expensive suits, clearly investors and board members, moved through the space with grim expressions. Elena recognized several faces from financial news programs, titans of venture capital who rarely appeared at routine company meetings. Victoria Hamilton intercepted Elena at the elevators, her professional mask slipping to reveal genuine concern. Dr. Matthews, I'm surprised to see you here. The board requested your presence, but I should warn you, Marcus is unstable this morning. For a moment, Elena saw something vulnerable in Victoria's eyes, a crack in the armor she'd built around herself. Victoria, it's not too late to do the right thing. Victoria's facade wavered. You don't understand the pressure. My son needs specialized care that costs thousands every month. Marcus knows that. He's made it clear what happens to people who cross him. Before Elena could respond, the elevator doors opened to reveal David Sterling, looking haggard but determined. Elena, thank God you're here. The board wants to hear from you directly. The executive conference room was packed with 12 board members, including Chairman Robert Caldwell, a legendary figure in Silicon Valley venture capital. Marcus sat at the head of the table, his usual confidence replaced by barely controlled fury. His eyes locked onto Elena with undisguised hatred. Gentlemen, Chairman Caldwell began, we're here to address serious allegations that have surfaced regarding the origins of our core technology and the conduct of company leadership. Dr. Matthews, you've made some extraordinary claims. We'd like to hear them directly. Elena stood, feeling the weight of the room's attention. These were some of the most powerful people in tech, and her next words would determine not just her fate, but the future of everyone at Nexus. Thank you for this opportunity, Elena began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. 2 months ago, I joined Nexus Dynamics believing I was contributing to legitimate innovation. What I discovered instead was a company built on stolen intellectual property and a pattern of abuse that ultimately led to murder. Marcus shot to his feet. This is outrageous. You're listening to the ramblings of a disgraced employee with a documented history of false accusations. Mr. Sterling, please sit down, Chairman Caldwell said firmly. Dr. Matthews, continue. Elena methodically presented her evidence. The code analysis proving Tommy Chen's algorithms formed Nexus's foundation. The documentation of Marcus's psychological manipulation of his former roommate, and the pattern of harassment and retaliation against employees who questioned company practices. These are sophisticated fabrications created by someone with deep technical knowledge, Marcus interrupted. Again, she's clearly being paid by competitors to… Marcus. The quiet voice came from the conference room's back corner. Victoria Hamilton stepped forward, her hands shaking but her voice clear. Stop lying. The room fell silent. Victoria moved to the front, facing the board with visible effort to maintain composure. Everything Dr. Matthews has said is true, Victoria continued. I have documentation of the harassment campaigns, the financial irregularities, the cover-ups. I've been complicit in Marcus's crimes for years because he threatened my son's medical care and my career. Victoria placed a thick folder on the conference table. This contains personnel files showing the systematic targeting of employees who asked inconvenient questions, financial records of payments made to silence victims, and email chains proving Marcus knew he was stealing Tommy Chen's work. Marcus's face had gone white. Victoria, you don't know what you're doing. Your son's medical bills will be my responsibility, Victoria said firmly. I won't be part of this anymore. Chairman Caldwell opened Victoria's folder, his expression growing darker as he reviewed the contents. Around the table, other board members whispered urgently among themselves. Suddenly, the conference room doors burst open. Sarah Thompson entered, followed by nearly 50 Nexus employees. Their faces showed a mixture of determination and fear, but they moved as a unified group. We're walking out, Sarah announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd found her moral center. We refuse to work for a company that builds success on theft and intimidation. Elena watched in amazement as engineers, designers, and project managers, people with mortgages, families, and career aspirations, chose principle over security. Among them, she spotted James Wilson, his face pale but resolute. Marcus turned to the board in desperation. You can't let them destroy everything we've built. One unstable woman's accusations. Mr. Sterling, Chairman Caldwell's voice cut through Marcus's protests like ice. Based on what we've heard today, this board is calling for your immediate resignation and the appointment of interim leadership pending a full investigation. You can't do this! Marcus's composure finally cracked completely. I built this company. Without me, you have nothing. Without stolen technology and murdered innovators, you mean? David Sterling said quietly, stepping forward from where he'd been standing near the wall. The board should also know that Marcus confessed to me that he killed Tommy Chen to prevent him from exposing the theft. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Elena saw several board members reaching for their phones, likely calling lawyers. Marcus spun toward his brother, his face contorted with rage. David, you weak, pathetic. Detective Morrison chose that moment to enter the conference room, flanked by 2 uniformed officers. Marcus Sterling, you're under arrest for the murder of Thomas Chen and multiple counts of corporate fraud. As the handcuffs clicked around Marcus's wrists, Elena felt a strange mixture of triumph and exhaustion. The man who'd built an empire on lies and intimidation was finally facing justice, but the cost had been enormous. Victoria Hamilton approached Elena as the room cleared. I'm sorry it took me so long to find my courage. I know that doesn't excuse what I've done. Elena looked at the woman who'd been both victim and perpetrator and felt the complexity of institutional corruption in a way she'd never fully understood before. What matters is that you finally spoke up. Tommy Chen deserves that much. As Elena walked out of the Nexus building for the last time, she saw Sarah organizing the striking employees in the plaza outside, their collective voice finally strong enough to demand change. The rebellion had succeeded, but Elena knew the real work of rebuilding, both the company and the culture that had enabled Marcus's crimes, was just beginning. The rebellion had succeeded, but Elena knew the real work of rebuilding, both the company and the culture that had enabled Marcus's crimes was just beginning. She watched through the conference room windows as Detective Morrison led Marcus Sterling away in handcuffs, his empire crumbling around him with each step toward the police car. But Elena's sense of victory was short-lived. As the board members filed out, their phones buzzing with urgent calls to lawyers and crisis management firms, Chairman Caldwell approached her with a grim expression. "Dr. Matthews, I need you to know that Marcus posted bail 2 hours ago. His legal team is already working to suppress evidence and discredit witness testimony. This fight is far from over." Elena felt a chill of apprehension. She'd underestimated Marcus's resources and connections before. She couldn't afford to do it again. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Conference room B, 20th floor. Come alone. We need to finish this." Elena showed the message to Detective Morrison, who had returned after processing Marcus's arrest. His face darkened as he read it. Absolutely not. This could be a trap, and Sterling is desperate enough to try anything. But Elena was already moving toward the elevator. "He's still in the building, which means he came back for a reason. He has something planned, and I need to know what it is." "Then I'm going with you." "No." Elena's voice was firm. "If he sees police, he'll lawyer up and we'll never get the truth. I can handle Marcus Sterling." Detective Morrison reluctantly handed her a small recording device. "At least wear this, and I'll be monitoring from the security office." Elena rode the elevator to the 20th floor, her heart pounding but her resolve steady. Conference room B was Marcus's private domain, where he'd conducted his most sensitive meetings. She found him standing at the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the San Francisco skyline he'd once believed he could conquer. "You destroyed everything," Marcus said, without turning around. His voice was eerily calm, but Elena could see the tension in his shoulders. 20 years of building something meaningful, and you tore it down with lies and jealousy." "I didn't destroy anything, Marcus. I exposed what was already rotten." Elena remained near the door, ready to run if necessary. Tommy Chen's work deserved to be acknowledged. His death deserved justice. Marcus finally turned, and Elena was shocked by his appearance. The confident CEO had been replaced by a haggard man with wild eyes and disheveled clothes. Tommy was weak. He would have wasted his genius in academia, publishing papers that 3 people would read. "I gave his work purpose, built an empire that employed hundreds of people." "You stole his life's work and then killed him when he threatened to expose you." "I saved him from irrelevance." Marcus's composure cracked, revealing the megalomaniacal core Elena had glimpsed during their first confrontation. "Everything I did was to ensure his algorithms would change the world." Tommy was too small-minded to see the bigger picture. Elena activated the recording device, knowing she needed Marcus to confess explicitly. "Tell me what really happened that night." "At Tommy's apartment." Marcus moved closer, his voice dropping to an almost intimate whisper. "Tommy called me hysterical, threatening to go to the press with accusations of theft. Said he'd rather destroy his own work than let me profit from it." Marcus's eyes took on a distant quality, as if reliving the memory. "I went to reason with him to make him understand that we were partners. But he was so paranoid, so convinced that I was his enemy. So you killed him." "I defended myself." Marcus's voice rose sharply. "He attacked me with a laptop, screaming about how I'd ruined his life. When I pushed him away, he fell and hit his head on the coffee table. There was so much blood." Elena felt sick, but pressed on. "But he was still alive, wasn't he?" Marcus's face went blank, his voice becoming mechanical. "He was unconscious but breathing. I checked his pulse, and I realized this was the solution to everything. If Tommy died tragically, his work would become my legacy without question. No one would ever challenge the origins of Nexus's technology. So you let him die." I made a business decision. Marcus's tone was chillingly matter-of-fact. I called 911, but not immediately. I waited exactly 12 minutes, long enough to ensure brain death, but short enough to claim I'd tried to save him. Elena struggled to maintain her composure as Marcus detailed the calculated murder of his former friend. You staged it to look like suicide. Tommy had a history of depression. It wasn't difficult to construct a narrative about academic pressure and financial stress. I even left a note on his computer, mimicking his writing style. Marcus smiled, with sick pride. The police investigation was perfunctory. No one questioned the brilliant entrepreneur grieving his troubled roommate. The conference room door suddenly burst open. James Wilson stood there, his face pale but determined, holding his own recording device. I heard everything, James said, his voice shaking with years of suppressed rage. I've been listening from the hallway, documenting every word of your confession. Marcus's demeanor changed instantly, the calculating predator replacing the emotional confessor. James, you don't understand the full situation. I have leverage over you, your parents' medical bills, your immigration status. One phone call from me and your family loses everything. I don't care anymore, James replied. I should have spoken up years ago when I first suspected what you'd done. Tommy Chen deserved better than my cowardice. Marcus reached into his jacket, and Elena's blood ran cold as she saw the glint of metal. I won't let you destroy what I've built. Not you, not her, not anyone. But before Marcus could fully draw the weapon, the conference room filled with SWAT officers, their tactical gear and weapons turning the corporate space into a war zone. Detective Morrison's voice echoed through a bullhorn. Drop the weapon, now. Marcus looked around the room at the faces staring back at him. Elena's determined resolve, James's quiet courage, the officer's professional readiness. For a moment, Elena saw the scared college dropout who'd built an empire on lies and murder. This isn't how it was supposed to end, Marcus whispered, the gun falling from his trembling hands. As the officers secured Marcus and read him his rights, Elena felt the weight of the past months finally lifting from her shoulders. Tommy Chen would have justice. The truth would survive Marcus Sterling's attempts to bury it. But as she walked out of the conference room for the final time, Elena knew the real victory wasn't Marcus's defeat. It was the courage that James, Victoria, Sarah, and dozens of other employees had found to stand up against institutional corruption. The final confrontation was over, but the work of building something better was just beginning. The final confrontation was over, but the work of building something better was just beginning. 6 months later, Elena stood in the same Nexus Dynamics conference room where Marcus Sterling had made his confession. But everything about the space had changed. The oppressive corporate art had been replaced with photos celebrating the company's diverse workforce, and the atmosphere buzzed with genuine collaboration rather than fear-driven productivity. The quarterly numbers are strong, David Sterling reported to the new board of directors, his voice carrying a confidence that had been absent during his brother's reign. Employee satisfaction is at an all-time high, and we've successfully licensed Tommy Chen's algorithms to 3 major research institutions, with all proceeds going to the Thomas Chen Memorial Foundation. Elena watched from her seat as the new chief technology officer, a position she'd accepted after months of careful consideration. The decision hadn't been easy. Part of her had wanted to leave Silicon Valley entirely, to start fresh somewhere Marcus Sterling's shadow couldn't reach. But Tommy Chen's legacy deserved better than abandonment, and Elena realized she was uniquely positioned to ensure his work would benefit the world in ways he'd intended. Detective Morrison had called that morning with news of Marcus's sentencing. Life in prison without parole for first-degree murder, plus additional time for corporate fraud and conspiracy charges. The trial had been a media sensation, with Amanda Foster's investigative reporting earning a Pulitzer Prize and sparking broader conversations about accountability in tech leadership. Elena, Would you like to present the AI Ethics Initiative? David asked, bringing her attention back to the meeting. Elena stood, feeling the weight of responsibility and opportunity in equal measure. The Thomas Chen Institute for Ethical AI is now operational, with a mandate to ensure artificial intelligence development serves humanity rather than exploiting it. We've hired Lin Chen as our Director of Community Outreach, and she's established partnerships with universities worldwide to promote transparent, responsible research. The presentation went smoothly, but Elena's mind kept drifting to the memorial, garden visible through the conference room windows. The company had dedicated a small courtyard to Tommy's memory, with a bronze plaque bearing his photograph and a quote from his research. True innovation serves all of humanity, not just those with power to profit from it. After the meeting, Elena found Sarah Thompson in the garden, reading under Tommy's memorial tree. Sarah had been promoted to senior engineer and now led the company's efforts to create inclusive hiring practices that valued merit over connections. "Any regrets?" Sarah asked as Elena joined her on the bench. Elena considered the question carefully. The past year had cost her tremendously. Months of anxiety, threats to her safety, and the constant weight of being a public figure in the fight for tech accountability. But it had also given her something she'd never expected, a sense of purpose that went beyond personal success. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd just kept quiet, focused on my own work," Elena admitted. Life would have been simpler. But Tommy Chen would still be forgotten, and Marcus would still be destroying lives. Sarah's voice carried the wisdom of someone who'd grown from idealistic graduate to seasoned advocate. "You gave all of us permission to stand up for what's right." Elena's phone buzzed with a message from Victoria Hamilton, now working as a victim advocate for employees facing workplace harassment. Victoria had used her insider knowledge of corporate intimidation tactics to help dozens of people navigate hostile work environments and legal challenges. Her son's medical bills were covered by a foundation Elena had helped establish using part of the settlement from Nexus's insurance company. The message was brief but meaningful. "Testified in another case today. Your courage gave me the strength to keep fighting. Thank you." That evening, Elena drove to Oakland to have dinner with Lin Chen, a ritual they'd maintained since Tommy's memorial service. Lin's apartment was filled with her brother's research notes and awards, but also with new additions. Photographs from the scholarship recipients who were studying AI ethics in Tommy's name. "I have something to show you," Lin said, pulling out a laptop. The first cohort of Chen scholars presented their research proposals last week. Tommy would have been so proud. Elena watched as Lin scrolled through presentations from students around the world, all working on projects that prioritized human welfare over commercial potential. One proposal focused on preventing AI bias in hiring algorithms. Another explored using machine learning to identify and prevent online harassment. "They understand that technology isn't neutral," Lin continued, "that every algorithm embeds the values of its creator. Tommy always said the most important question in computer science wasn't, can we build this? But should we build this?" As Elena drove home, she reflected on the unexpected turns her life had taken. The scared woman who'd started at Nexus, hoping for a quiet career, had become a public advocate for tech accountability, testifying before Congress about the need for stronger oversight of artificial intelligence development. Her phone rang as she pulled into her driveway. Amanda Foster, calling with news about her latest investigation. "Elena, I wanted you to be the first to know. That series on defense contractor fraud we discussed? The Pentagon Inspector General just announced a full investigation based on our reporting. Your work at Nexus inspired a whole new approach to exposing institutional corruption." Elena felt a familiar flutter of anxiety mixed with excitement. Amanda was essentially offering her a chance to become a full-time corporate whistleblower, using her technical expertise to uncover fraud across multiple industries. "I'm honored by the offer," Elena said carefully. But I think my work at Nexus isn't finished yet. We're still rebuilding a culture that had been toxic for years. Tommy's legacy deserves that commitment. After ending the call, Elena sat in her car for a moment, looking up at the stars barely visible through San Francisco's light pollution. Tommy Chen had died believing his work would be forgotten, that his contributions to human knowledge would be stolen and perverted by those with more power than principles. Instead, his algorithms were now helping researchers cure diseases, predict climate patterns, and identify misinformation campaigns. His name was spoken with respect in computer science classrooms around the world. His sister had found purpose in carrying forward his vision of technology as a tool for human flourishing rather than exploitation. Elena had learned that speaking truth to power came with costs she couldn't have imagined: the isolation, the threats, the constant scrutiny of her every decision. But she'd also discovered something more valuable than career success or financial security: the knowledge that she'd helped create a world where brilliant young researchers like Tommy Chen could thrive without fear, where their contributions would be celebrated rather than stolen, where their voices would be heard rather than silenced. The battle for Tommy Chen's legacy had ended, but the war for a more just and equitable tech industry would continue. Elena was ready to fight it, one algorithm at a time. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.